Okay, so here's where we're going to do a little demonstration for WonderWare. Now we've got a regular start-stop latch, and then we've got our start process bit. Now when the process starts, we're going to run a timer that's a 1 second timer. Now we're going to run into a flip-flop so it'll blink at a 1 second rate. Now that'll also go into a counter which will have a count, and when our count gets up to, and I'm going to change this, when our count gets up to 25, then we're going to hit end of cycle, and that's all that this thing does. And I think we should be pretty good to go with this program. Yep. Or maybe not. Let's try to download this, see what's, oh, I changed that from 20 to 25, so that's what happened, why it was not ready. So that should be good now, and we'll go into the go and put this online. I'm going to turn these guys on with this little monitoring on off, so we'll be able to see what's happening, but we really don't care. We're going to WonderWare. So I have a blank screen open with WonderWare. Now be really careful, because this is going to open, generally speaking, it opens into the last program available. Since this is new, it's probably going to open up into this PC demo thing. You definitely do not want to be here. So you go in there and say new, and I'll just call this WonderWare WonderWare demo. Okay, and I'm going to change the location to my local drive, and that'll be okay. So now this thing just gives you the width, and you don't care about that. We want the whole width of the screen, but you know, in the future, if you're going to make something for a tablet, you know, you might want to pare it down so it fits correctly, because this would be too gigantic for a little tablet. Now what it comes up with first, when it comes up, the basic things that you're going to work with is you're going to work with graphics and comms for right now. For this is just beginning, and you know, you're only going to do one thing. But highlight screen, right click it, and say insert. Now we're only going to do one screen, so just call it main. Then you can run down here for the runtime properties. You can put in main. I'm not sure that's required, but we're going to do it. And now you get like a grid screen. So the first thing to do is go up here for text, and I'm just going to say that this is going to be main screen. And now it's just text. So when you have it highlighted, you can change properties, and I'll just change properties, make it bigger and make it bold. So I'm going to make it black. I'm going to make it size 20 since we want it to be kind of obvious. And there you can see what happens, and that's fine. Now when we're in this screen, our main stuff is going to be on the graphics. So what we're going to do, and the first thing that you need on all your programs, is you need to just highlight button, and then you can put it anywhere you want, and you can make it as big as you want. We're just going to make a button. We're going to put it at the bottom. We're going to click on it. We're going to call it exit. Now you need an exit button just to get you in and out of the program. Now if we go into fonts, we're going to make it red, and not because it has to be, but okay, we had a temporary memory problem there, and hopefully we got that resolved. Anyway, what we were doing is we were showing when you're in this and we have our exit button, up here on the very top is where you can go into the run mode. And when you go into the run mode here, it covers up the whole screen, and there's no way out of it unless you use the exit button. So we're going to take the exit. That'll get us back to our editing screen. So now we're going to start making some stuff. And again, you want to be mostly in the graphics. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to just highlight a push button, and we're going to put it in here. And we're going to use these guys for our start and stop. So now we're going to put in a tag expression, and again we'll do PB start. And when you put that in there, it's going to say this doesn't exist. Would you like to create it? Yes. Now it's going to be a Boolean. Make sure you put them in Boolean, and that's okay. And we're done with that. Now we can go into configuration. We want to change this to start. We'll change this to start. Now for start, we do want it to be green, but for this color, I like putting it as gray so that when you actually press the button, it'll change colors so you know you did it. Now you can make these buttons momentary, or you can make them like toggle. You can make them normally open, normally close. We're going to leave everything as is. Now here, all you have to do is just hold down the control key and then you can copy it. So here we're going to start this and we're going to make this stop. Okay, and we'll go into the configuration. It doesn't exist. Yes, we're going to make a Boolean again. Alright, configuration, we'll make this stop. And we'll make it red. And we'll change this to stop over here too, I guess. And that'll be fine. And that'll be good for that. Now, we've got, and I'm going to move these down. And when you move them, you want to highlight it, but you want to make sure you're moving it inside of this. Like if I tried to move these here, they wouldn't do anything because I'm not inside one of the boxes. Now, I'm going to put in an ellipse, and I'm going to make a little roundish thing, and you got to kind of play with it to make it round. Anyway, I'm going to move this over, and now I'm going to, you can take anything and give it different animations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it color. So now when I go in here, it's going to say, okay, what expression do you want to give it color? And I'm going to put in our start process tag. And again, that'll be the tag after that. When we hit the start button, this is the signal that actually gets latched. Now, okay, so it's going to say that doesn't exist either. So we're going to make that a Boolean. And now when it's off, I don't want it to be red. I'll make it something like grayish. And that'll be fine. Now, I've also got some other signals. I've got this blink signal. So I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to make this, I'm going to call that our blink. And I think what I actually called that in the project was blink flip-flop. So we'll give it the same name. We'll return, it doesn't exist. We want to create it. It'll be a Boolean. And so every time it's counting up, it'll be blinking. And so one of the things that I did here, for WonderWare, it has to be one word or underscores for everything. Otherwise it gets a little confused. We're going to create that tag. It's going to be a Boolean. And now, instead of it being green, I'm going to make it a color that's kind of, it's neither go or stop, but when it's blinking on and off, I'm going to just have it this amber color. And that should be good. Now, I'm also going to go back into our graphics, and I'm going to put text up here, and I'll put it right above it, and I'm going to just go and call that the timer, and that'll blink when our timer is counting. And I'm going to move it over here, and I'm probably going to change the font a little bit, just make it a bit larger. It's at 10, I'll make it 12, and that'll be good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all this. So I'm holding down control and moving it over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this the end cycle. And again, that one doesn't exist yet. So if we hit return. Oh, so that was just text that I put in here. What I need to do is I need to highlight this one, and we're going to give its expression end cycle. And now it's going to say that doesn't exist. Would you like to create this tag? And we'll say yes. And that's fine. Oh, no, that wasn't fine because I called it an integer. So let's see if we can find this again. And we'll look at our project tags and the end cycle. Okay, well, in here in the global tags, you can go in the project tags over here. And the tag list, I am going to go into the datasheet view, and here, when I get into the end cycle, here is where I can change it if I make a mistake to Boolean, and I'm going to do that there. So I said you only needed to be in the graphics or comms, but every once in a while you have to, when you make a mistake, you have to get in there. Now what I'm going to do for this is I'm also going to, when it goes to end cycle, I'm going to make it, I'll make it like a violet color. So it'll go from gray to this violet, which it might show up very dark on your screen. Now, a last thing I'm going to do, this counts up to 25, and then it goes to end of cycle. Now, for your little box sorter, you're going to be counting boxes at some point. So we want to go into our graphics. Now we can go into our symbols. And now here you can have project symbols or system symbols. Now we don't have anything in the project yet, so we'll go into the system symbols, and you get all these different things. If I wanted, say I wanted a motor, you know, you can have all these different views of motor, and you can put in your program. Now really what I wanted is I want an indicator. And I am just going to pick something that can allow us to count. And I put that in there, and it's really big. And actually, it's too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it and say I want to edit this symbol. And now you go into a separate page. And now what I can do is I can kind of shrink it down, but what I need to do is I need to go into caption, and then I need to go into the font. And here it's size 60. Now I do not want size 60 print. I'm going to tone it down to maybe size 12 and say that's okay, that's okay. And you can see that it's a lot smaller. So I'm going to X out of here, and it's going to say save changes, yep. And now it says it's only going to take effect when I put it on a screen, and that's fine with me. So it's going to be on my screen, and I'm going to put it down here. And what I'm not going to have any decimals, and I'm going to give it the name of count. Now this count is going to be, this one is going to be an integer. So when I say do I want to create it, yep. And now this one is an integer, so I'm fine. So let's see what we've got. We've got start, stop, push buttons, and that's going to turn on a light when that happens. When that happens, we're going to start timing out. So this should start blinking for us. When we get, and this will be the actual count. So what I want to do here is I want to go back into our graphics, and I want to put text. And I am going to make that say, well, count. And I'm going to change that font size to, I'm going to make that bigger, and I'll make that like 14 since he needs to be a little bit bigger. So this is going to be an integer as it's counting up. And that should be everything I want on the screen. But you can see how you can add things to your screen. You know, if you didn't want to just, you know, what we did for the graphics here is we just took an ellipse. Now, one of the things you could have done is you could have gone to the symbols, and just like they have indicators, they also have pilot lights. So if I wanted something to be a pilot light, I could make it an amber, I could make it a green, I could make it a blue. You know, pick whatever you want. You can make your own, or you can come up with other ones. Now the other thing we have to do is in comms. Now here's where we communicate with the PLC. The first thing to do is select a driver. We right click on that, and we are going to add a driver. Now we're using Siemens, so we need to do that. But if we were using the Allen Bradley 1100, we would pick this Allen Bradley CIP. But we are not going to do that. So we're going into the Siemens. It's Siemens Ethernet, so we want to go into SIF. And we want to select that. That's fine. We don't really have to do much to that. But if we click in drivers, now we see that. Now if we click down here, it'll say the driver sheet. Now here's where we actually put the tag names to marry them to the PLC. So if we click on these, it'll give us what our tag names are. So the first one is we want start. Okay, now that is memory 0.0, and that's all we need. For the second one, we're going to put in stop, and that's memory 0.1. Then we have our start process, which is 0.2. Now we have the blink. Oh, and sometimes if you click in there once, you have to go out and then double click on it to get back in. So I think we want blink flip-flop, which is 0.3. Because that one that just said blink, we made the mistake by not underscoring. So now we have end of cycle, which is M04. And then finally, we have this thing called count. Now this one is an integer, and that integer in the PLC is Q because it's an output. It's a word because it's an integer, and it takes up space number 0. So that's all of our signals. Now there's one last thing we have to do. To tie it into our PLC, we have to put in the PLC address, which it's the IP address 192.168.0.1. Now what you have to do is :0:1, and that is the station, and I'll explain that in a second. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it in every single one. Now how do we get that? If we look at our Siemens PLC, and if we go to the Siemens, the configuration, what this says, it's the PLC has that IP address, but it is in rack 0 and it's in slot 1. So when we go into the WonderWare and we say that's the IP address, then it's talking about what rack and what slot. So that's how it gets 0.1. You know, you could have 5 different PLCs, and you know, one might be in slot 1, one might be in slot 4, you know, whatever it is, and one might be in rack 2. So there's a bunch of different configurations. So now you can say, well, X out of here, and then it's going to say save. And generally speaking, you can never X out of something and lose your information. It's going to say save changes, and you always want to save it. So now we should be ready to go. So we put it into start mode, and you know, our count is. Okay, so let's get this started, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the PLC into run mode and go over to our WonderWare, and we're going to put this into the start. Okay, now actually, okay, so I was practicing before and it was still showing the conditions there, and the software doesn't take effect immediately. And sometimes you have to be careful when you press these buttons. If you press it too quick, sometimes it doesn't happen. But I'm going to press the start, and it goes green, and now we start counting. We're counting like every second or so. Or maybe it's a 1 second counter, so it counts every 2 seconds. And it's going to count up to 20. And when it gets up to 20 is when we get to our end cycle, and that's when this is going to go off. Or maybe it's 25. Can't remember how I did that. I guess it is 25. So we get a count of 25, and the end of cycle goes on. So if we want to stop it, now one of the things I did when I was putting in the program is I put in a little stop signal that would reset our timer. So when we start again, all we have to do is hit stop. And anywhere in this cycle we can hit stop. And that goes back to 0, and we can start it again. Now another thing is, so we have this count setting to 25. One of the cool things with WonderWare, and you can do it for any symbol, but what we're going to do is we're going to go in and just make something text. And we're going to put this as, I'm going to call it my count 2 value. And here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it a little bigger. So I'll make it font 12. But then what I'm going to do is well, first I'm going to change this, and I'm going to put semicolon, then a space, and then I'm going to put a couple hash marks or pound signs. And now what that does is it gives it a link to a data value. Now, and if I go into data link, I'm going to say count to value. And remember, we've got to keep this as one word or do underscores. Now, when I do this, it's going to say, hey, that doesn't exist. But I'm going to create an integer tag. And we're going to say, OK. And now, when I have this, I can put whatever value I want. Now, what I need to do is I'm going to go into my PLC program. And we have this thing, so it counts to this value. And we have it set up for 25 right now. So I'm going to go offline. I'm going to change this. I'm going to make this count to value. And so now it's going to say you need to define that. We're going to define that as a, this is going to be, well, it can be a global memory. It doesn't have to be an output. And we want it to be an integer. So it's going to be global word 2. So we're going to define that. And now what we do in our WonderWare, again, we're going to go back into the comms, and we're going to go into our drivers. We're going to go onto this sheet. And now, just like we have the com as WQ0, we're going to put in our count to value. And we're going to make that M, because that was just a memory, but it's MW2. Now we also have to make sure that we got the right station. So we're going to copy that and put it down there. Okay, and we should be good to go. We're going to save changes. And now if we run this, I should be able to put in the count to value here. Oh, okay, so when I do this, when I do count to value, I want to enable the input. It's kind of important if you want to put data in. So now I can put data in. That's what I had wrong there. That's why I couldn't change it before. So we're going to put that in there. I'm going to go into run. Now before I start, I'm going to change this value to, I'm going to change it to 12. And let's see why I can't change that. Okay, so now it's going to count to 12 when I start it up. So now I'm going to start. And now when it gets to our count to value of 12 is when we should end our cycle. And you can use this for anything. If you just want to, and let's watch this run. And that did not work. So it's going to count up to 25, and let's see why that didn't work. After it gets to 25, we'll look into our program. So we need to go into the Siemens program. Our count to value, MW2. Okay, let's go online. Oh, and maybe I didn't have it online and I didn't download that information into the program, which is why it didn't work. And, you know, these are the things that are kind of confusing, but you're going to have to get used to them. So now when we look at it, now it is 12. So now when we count, if we get it into run mode, and I'll stop it for a second. And now, when we start, hopefully it'll count to 12 at this point, and then it'll stop. And you can use these things, like right now we're just inputting it to see a value, and let's see if it does its thing. So count to 12, and then it did stop. Now I could stop it, and I can go in here and I can change this to 6. Okay, so now we should have the same thing, and now we're going to count to 6 when we go. So now it's 1. And you can use these to monitor any value. like if I just, and now it's 6 and 6, but if I had this, and for some reason, we'll just look at the end cycle. But let's say I needed to know what that value is, and again, I can just copy it down here, and what I'm going to do is do a text link, and it automatically puts the hashtags in there, but I'm going to pick the expression end cycle. I'm going to say OK. So now, and I can actually go into the text and I can get rid of a couple of these hashtags, because that's just binary. So it's either going to show up as a 0 or 1. But if my program isn't running, and I think I have a problem with end cycle, but I'm not sure, and I need to know whether it's a logic 0 or logic 1, I can monitor it just in this fashion. Now here it happens to be at the end of cycle because it stopped at the last one, but when we hit stop it'll go back to 0. And when it does, this tells me that that's binary 0 in the PLC program. So, you know, you can put whatever you need until you get it working, and then when you get it working you can say, well, I don't need this anymore because it's working. And here it'll stay 0 until it goes to 6, and when it goes to 6 that'll turn on and that'll go to logic 1. See how that works? And so now when we say, okay, now we've got it working, can just delete that because we don't need it anymore. So that is a quick run through on some of the things that you need. And you know, if you do it for the box sorter stuff, you're going to need the start and stop. We want the indicator. We're going to need a counter of how many boxes you processed. And you know, you can use these instead of timer. You're going to have your signals like my conveyor entry is on, so you can turn it, you know, a dull color, and then when you want it on, it can be green. So you're going to have your conveyors and your different conveyors. You know, you're going to have, when your diverter is active, you're going to have your counter of the number of boxes. You know, you're also going to have a reset, so you can reset the counter. So, and you know, we probably should have that in there too. If we had a reset, like right now we go back to 0 when we stop, but we could actually put a reset button that would reset everything and start the process over. And actually that'd be a little better, but you know, that's the idea, and you guys can do that. This is going to be something like your WonderWare, but again, you can jazz this screen up and, you know, make it look pretty nice. And the nicer screens, or the more obvious screens that can tell me exactly what's going on, gets a better score. So that's what you're going to do for WonderWare. It's a pretty cool program. We actually have it set up so, you know, you're only going to be using it for sure on this one project. Depending on what project you're going to use, you're going to have to use WonderWare because it works better for some interfaces. Now, this also works, again, with our Allen Bradley. It works with our Siemens. It also works with our little click PLCs. It works with just serial interfaces like our barcode scanners, which one of our projects is going to use that, so it needs to use this. And you students get a free year's use of this. So you can knock yourself out and learn everything about that. And I'm going to make a longer video that shows how to do it with one of your Pro Logics. It's a really full-blown version of it. Anyway, that's the introduction to WonderWare.